Hello and welcome to the Rangers Rabble Academy special. Today I'm joined by the head of the Rangers Academy, Craig Mulholland. How's it going, Craig?
Very good, Willie. Thank you for having me on.
Great stuff. I know I've been pestering you for this for a long time, so it's good to finally get it sorted out, isn't it?
Well, I think it's important that all you viewers know why we're kind of on this morning and supporting this, because probably a lot of the guys don't know that yourself and Peter and Jim and Gordon and Robbie and Ross, and probably missed a few of the guys, come to every single youth game. And I think it's probably good for your viewers to know that the reason you guys have got such a knowledge of what we do is that you guys have been at, I think with somebody, big Robert turned up at South Africa, and we were there with the guys out of Qatar. Everyone's up at Elgin the other night. It's incredible. And one of the things we always speak about is see the Rangers support and the influence they have in developing our young players. So, you take Alex and Leo and stuff last year, they've played in front of good crowds. So what you guys do coming to the games, because listen, we've all been going to Ibrox and that bit's easy being a Rangers supporter, isn't it? But some of the trips that you guys do, going to Elgin on a Tuesday and then down to Huddersfield or something on a Wednesday like you've done in the past, we are really grateful for that, Willie. And that's why when you asked us to come on, we're really keen to come on and support what you guys are doing this morning, because for all you guys who come, and again, for those who don't know, there's a group of what, 12 or 15 probably overall, isn't there?
That's right.
And these are absolutely everything. So we can give something back to you guys, then great, and we thank you for that.
That's appreciated. Thanks very much. Right, I'll say I spoke to you before the pod, so I think the biggest thing everybody wants to know is why did the academy make such a big push in the summer recruitment, and kind of what was the reasoning behind it?
Yeah, so this is not something that's new to us this year. This is something we've planned, Willie, for a number of years, because what happens is, see when you form your under 10 group, which is the first, the kind of last amateur group, if you like, and then they sign for the club at under 11s. If you don't get that bit right at under 10s, you're always chasing it the whole way through, year after year. So if you remember, if you think of the age these kids are now, which is about 7 years ago, that's when the club was still in the championship. At that point, the academy hadn't been remoulded and reshaped. We were probably still losing a lot of players to other clubs at that point. And we probably didn't start, if you look at our 05 and 06 group, they probably were never Rangers' strongest groups in terms of the number of A players that we had coming through those groups. So what's happened is we've planned for this. So we now have a succession planning model. We've got a player grading model, and there's basically a pipeline of talent all the way through from under 11 right through to the B team. And then what we look at is where are those gaps? Where do the gaps occur? And then where do we recruit into those gaps to make sure we've always got enough A players in the system that we can push forward towards the first team. So we've known for a number of years, you've watched the games well this year, you'll have appreciated that. When you look at the likes of an 07 group below it, we've got a fantastic group coming there. They'll come into next year's under 18s, and we probably won't need to do hardly any recruitment. But we knew when we hit this under 18 spot where the 05s and 06s came together, this was going to be a massive year for us in terms of recruiting into that group to make sure we've got enough A players that we think are in a pipeline that can go and hit the first team. The following year, if we look at the 07s coming next, and they join them with the 06s that we now have, there probably won't need to be much recruitment. The following year again, if we look at the 08s probably aren't our strongest overall group, but there's some really fantastic players in that group who will join a big group of 07s. And when we look at the 09s below that, they're a really strong group. So the smaller group of 08s will join with those 09s. So when we project forward to the under 18s, we're always looking to see where those gaps are. So I think from that point of view, David Stevenson and his team, Big Phil Cowan, who you know, Ian Murdoch, Max Ashmore, Curtis, they've done a wonderful job over the last 2 years looking at that sort of 14 to 16-year-old gap and saying, right, who do we want to go for this summer? And then off the back of that, obviously, Rory Wilson headed down south. So we make sure commercially we get the right deal off the back of that. And then what that does is that helps fund a lot of the signings we've made this summer using the FIFA cross-border model. And actually, we're sitting at the moment where a number of new A players in the building that we're really excited about, but we're actually also sitting in a positive cash position from Rory heading down the road. So where years ago, and that was the same, if a player was maybe moving down to England, you would get panicky about it, or it was an issue. This is going to become, because of the Brexit rules and the change in Brexit rules, and again, you see, you come to the games, the number of English scouts that come to our games is probably doubled or tripled from where we were. Then what we had to do is make sure commercially when somebody goes down the road, we do a really good deal for Rangers. But off the back of that, we can use the FIFA cross-border rules to make sure we bring some really exciting talent the other direction to Rangers. And I think, well, if you look at what we've brought in, we've got some of the best young Scottish talent, we think, that we've brought in. Yeah. There's some from the private academy market in England, which is a really interesting market for us. And then there's also some lads who are offered contracts at their existing clubs, within professional clubs in England. that we've managed to attract up the road to Rangers. So we're really excited by the work that we've done. Today is the first game against Carlisle, so we're looking forward to seeing some of them actually get on a pitch and perform. But we think we've actually improved massively this summer the number of A players, but also commercially for the club ended up in a cash positive position.
What is the kind of background to these sort of private academies? I know obviously there's been a bit of chat with Jack Roberts coming up the road and obviously some of the recruitment this year as well. What is the kind of background to these academies, and why are Rangers looking at like sort of that kind of talent pool?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because it's not something that we were probably that close to up to 2 or 3 years ago. And probably David Stevenson, but certainly Phil Cowan has led on this project for us. Right. And if you look at many of the clubs in England, they take the Joe Aribos who've been in these kind of academies. They're basically private academies that run mostly in London. Certainly Birmingham's starting to get some, Manchester's starting to get some. And it's kids that are playing in cages, it's kids that are off the street. Some really, really good volunteers almost going to run them, albeit there's now a financial market behind it as well. But some of the talent in there's just talent that seems to get missed who haven't been in the academy system for a very young age. So what we accept is that when you bring them up, they maybe don't have the professional values that you want them to have. They don't understand the lifestyle, the diet, it's small, simple things. Some of the lads that came up yesterday, we saw them ready to leave the training ground and they still had their training kit on from training. We said, guys, have you not been for a shower? They're not used to doing that after training. That's the real detail that we're going to. However, if we can get those bits right round about them, and we can shape their lifestyles, we can get them in elite habits, their actual potential and talent is probably quite different from the profile we get in Scotland. And don't get me wrong, Willie, first and foremost for Rangers, we want to have the best players in Scotland. We're a Scottish club, we need to make sure we're getting the best Scottish players. That will never change. But the reality is we also need to widen the horizons. And what we've done is there's 2 or 3 new scouts we put into those key areas in England to actually make sure we're first at that market. We're getting the intel. And you probably find the players, well, not so much for scouting because there's so many, but see the relationships and the intel. And what I want Rangers to be is right at the heart of that knowledge base. And I think with Phil and the guys that we're now employing down there, I think we'll certainly get some joy out of that, albeit we accept that some of these lads won't work out and they'll go back down the road and it's almost like an extended trial you bring them up for. But we're pretty confident, and you'll see this season that 1 or 2 that we've signed, we think have got really high potential and can kick on.
Well, I suppose in the Scottish market, I know you also don't want to kind of like sort of touch on too many of the, the guys because they're still quite young. Getting players like sort of Lancelot Pollard and getting somebody like Bailey Rice. I mean, I think Bailey in particular, there was clearly a lot of talk around Bailey and Rangers having an interest. A lot of the top English clubs were looking at him as well. How difficult is it now to actually get the best young Scottish players because of Brexit and the amount of English scouts that are watching these games?
Yeah, I think it is competitive. I think there's probably 2 points in what you said there, Willie. The first point is, you're right, we don't want to hype these young players up because what happens is everybody sees them as a signing, but they're 16 years old. In fact, if you take Bailey, just because you mentioned him, he's only 15, only turned 16 in October, actually, right? So think of yourself at 15. If all of a sudden there's a lot of social media, there's Rangers, you're signed there, everything that goes with that, we want to calm that down. That's why we don't do. People often ask, why do we not cover the under, or do we cover the B team more than we cover the under 18s? Because the under 18s, we want to give time to develop. We want to give them the space to develop. We want them to do the various learning journeys